All right. Well, welcome everyone to another edition of CrossFit Medical Society Grand Rounds. We have a very special guest with us here this evening. He's not clad in black with a veil. I'm not exactly sure why, as we just come out of the national championship a few short nights ago, where the Ohio State Buckeyes ran the table and got it done against Dr. Metoyer's Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, which I also have deep connections to as well. But we really appreciate Casey being here and very excited to have him here because he's a true resource for our community. A little bit of background about Casey. So he, has been in the CrossFit world for a long time and had his L1 at one point, still has it, may not be quite active, but it is there. And I'll let him tell a little bit of his CrossFit story, but that's been kind of a continuous theme in his life throughout school and work, which you definitely want to hear more about. But Casey, you did your undergrad at Arizona State, if I'm remembering correctly, and then a number of stops along the way, but ultimately kind of culminating in a PhD at the University of Alabama in sports science. And was there for a period of time, and most recently has been at the University of Notre Dame as one of their lead human performance specialists. And even more recently than that, I don't know if you want to make an announcement to what you're going to be doing now, but I think it's really exciting. I'll let you jump in there, and then you can give us a bit of your origin story. But what are you going to be doing next, Casey?
Yeah, super. You guys may be one of the first public audiences to
Yeah,
know,
right.
but yeah, I took a opportunity with Sporting KC, an MLS club, to be their lead performance scientist, and try and just help drive their processes with all of their data integrations. They were doing a lot of great things, but there's always opportunities to iterate and improve. And so I'm going to be working with them for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Casey and I got connected through our good friend Mike G, who was instrumental in kind of helping lift the medical society off the ground. And you guys go kind of way back, right? Casey, Mike for a long time. And as I understand it, have been kind of nudging and being in Mike's ear about let me know when you're ready to actually get down and dirty and do some research in the CrossFit space because I'd love to help support that. So if you want to talk a little bit more kind of about that background with Mike and where we are now, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so my meeting Mike was mainly through my acquaintance with Stefan Roche and his long background with CrossFit and he's been in and around it since I think the birth, really. And so I've known Stefan since 2016, 17, somewhere in there. And me and him have always hit it off because of our CrossFit backgrounds. And when as CrossFit health has progressed, I've always kind of kept an eye on it. And I've always been interested. But then when kind of the rebranding and some of the push came from the CrossFit Medical Society to really take over, I reached out to Stefan and he connected me with Mike, and that's where I kind of just really harped on this idea that I think all of us have, and that's this exercise is medicine, and we should be using it that way. And I think for numerous reasons, which we can all probably get on our soapbox for, it hasn't been used in that manner up to this point. But super excited about the initiatives that you guys and we as a group, as a team, have going, and the opportunities there are just phenomenal to change the way we've done medicine for the past probably 50 to 100 years. So there's just so much greatness coming out of this.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Yeah, I forgot we had talked about Stefan, dude. That guy is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Talk about a gentle giant, just so intelligent, and knows the stuff inside out and has done it all. I love my conversations with him. He's a really bright individual, so that's very cool.
Yeah.
Why don't you take us back to kind of how you first got led into this space and what drew you to it, and kind of how your career culminated before we kind of dive into what we're going to talk about this evening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's been, gosh, it's been a wild ride, but I remember 2010. I'm pretty confident was the year. I couldn't tell you the exact day, unfortunately. It was a day in California. It was sunny, 75 degrees, I'm sure. Not trying to rub in the Indiana cold at all. But or the Ohio cold for you guys. But yeah, so a friend of mine who competed in the sport at that time, her name was Lindsay Valenzuela. I'm forgetting her married name now, but she was also in the strength and conditioning coaching world, and she was competing in CrossFit, competed at regionals, and she was like, "Hey, you got to go check out CrossFit. Valley CrossFit in the San Fernando Valley, near Los Angeles, is like one of the best places and one of the original OGs." And so I was like, "All right, I'm gonna go." Went in there, loved it. First workout, as these things go, right, was Fran. Solid 10-minute time on my first workout, Fran, to start things off. And as probably so many of our stories goes, right? You fell in love in that moment, and in the pain, suffering, and the sweat, and you're like, you know what? For some reason, I'm stuck on this, and it's going to be a great journey. And that's how it all took off. And then through that, I got interested in strength and conditioning, and had a lot of different stops. Of worked at UCLA, worked at Western Illinois, worked at Auburn, worked at Kentucky, worked at Alabama, and then again, most recently, my most recent stop here at Notre Dame, where I officially kind of transitioned over to what some people say is the dark side, in the sports science world, where I'm really getting to navigate more of the data and some of the research behind all the things that make our athletes tick and make us kind of be able to perform at the levels that we want to perform at.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome summary. I know while you've been at Notre Dame, you've been working on a number of different projects, but one of them was a grant-funded study with the NFL. Is that right? Can you talk a
That
little?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So what actually brought me to Notre Dame was the opportunity to work on this NFL grant funded research project on hamstring injury. Really, really interesting research project in which we were going to be able to look at our football players and evaluate them for hamstring injury prevalence, as well as across a number of different tests, including MRI, hamstring strength via Nordboard, range of motion, and a couple other different items in there. But that study, Notre Dame was one part of a multi-site study. There was four other institutions involved with that, and just getting a really large epidemiological picture on hamstring injury, and trying to develop. I think the ultimate goal there is to develop kind of a risk score for hamstring injury. And for the NFL, which they would ultimately be able to deploy across the league. Now we're 6 months away from the completing that study, and somebody's finishing up at Notre Dame in my stead. But it was a really, really great opportunity and really awesome, and I was super excited to be a part of as much as I got to, in while I was there, and really doing some great things with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. topic and area to explore, right? Because as I think you had mentioned in one of our conversations, is hamstring injuries are one of the more common, and it keeps guys out kind of one of the longest periods, right? So there's kind of obvious reasons why the NFL would be incentivized to be able to kind of intervene and prehab kind of before that injury cascade kicks in. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. It is considered the number one time loss soft tissue injury across all of sports.
Oh wow, all of sports.
All of sport. Yep. 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 Yep.
Okay.
And I think the key, a couple of the words there, right? It's soft tissue, so it's not a connective
So,
tissue injury, right?
yeah,
And then time loss as well, right? So when guys get significant hamstring injuries, your grade twos, your grade threes, like those guys are missing a lot of time. And then when you factor that in, is it's common, right? As you had mentioned. So when you compound commonality with time loss, that's where it far surpasses anything else.
I'm just imagining the gym at Notre Dame and any place that you go now, there's just Nordics everywhere, and you
Oh yeah.
just guys just like, nope, 10 more fellas.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It might be the most it's the simplest exercise, but it's probably also the most hated exercise across the vast majority of your athletes. They're all Nordboard day is like it's Nordboard day, right? It's a thing within the clubhouse. And so, but to our credit is when we were running some of our own internal models, Nordboard asymmetry and Nordboard strength decrease was probably the highest indicator for potential hamstring injury
So
across all of our different testing modalities.
yeah, I believe it. I
Yeah.
saw an amazing video the other day of Tyreek Hill with another wide receiver, and they were both doing Nord boards. And his friend was like, and just fell over, and Tyreek
Oh yeah.
was like, me, 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 me. I mean, just literally bouncing up and down. It was the
Oh yeah.
craziest thing. I mean, because if you've ever never tried one, uh, in all likelihood, your hammies are underdeveloped and you will fall on your face. It is not
For
easy to
sure.
do. And so to demonstrate that much control and power, you see why he's so fast.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No doubt. No doubt. I mean, he's a freak for sure. And we were fortunate to have there was one guy I can specifically remember, Jaden Harrison. They actually, so all of our data is de-identified, but he was in the study, and one of the third party data company reached out to me and was like, "Hey, can you double check this guy's numbers?
Right.
They don't seem accurate for his position group. He's a wide receiver." And I'm like, "Huh, I wonder who it is because they just have his ID number." And
Yeah.
so I went and I looked, and his like the guy's crazy, just like very similar to Tyreek. He just holds and then can come back up on command.
Come right back up without making contact.
Oh
Oh
yeah. Oh
my God.
yeah.
Crazy, man.
Yeah. Yeah. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Well, very cool. Let's talk about, I mean, you wrote an amazing article for the newsletter, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. I mean, I think that any of us in this field, and even more so if you aren't in, you know, if you aren't a healthcare provider, um, reading, internalizing, comprehending research is a persistent challenge.
For sure.
Even for those of us that, went to medical school and got some training in this, there's not a lot of time that's allotted to kind of understanding how to read studies, how to interpret studies, where you start, what makes a good study, what discounts it, uh, and most importantly, to your point, how do I make this applicable? Right? How do I translate what I'm reading that is in this esoteric foreign language into something that can be meaningful for myself and for the people that I'm trying to help? So I love the thrust of the arguments that you were making, the position you were putting out. Do you mind kind of expounding on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, and we'll dive into this a little bit in the presentation. But I mean, so much of it comes around simplifying the language, right? Like if you can pull out, and the funny thing is like these are some of the strategies that I provided are strategies that like I learned, probably yourself, any one of us, right, who's been through a degree seeking program, you kind of learn some of these strategies along the way. But for the general public, like when a research article gets presented out there, like they don't have these strategies equipped because they haven't been given them, right? And like things as simple as like look for a purpose statement, look at the conclusions, maybe it's read through the abstract. There's just like little nuggets in there where you can pull out that information and you're like, okay, I get the bulk of this study and I can at least interpret it enough to then be able to action it. Now, like you kind of mentioned, is there is opportunities in there where bad research is bad research, and so it can be misconstrued by researchers, and the story doesn't quite get told appropriately. But I think that in my opinion, like any one of us can be deceived, right? Like, if we go back to the 1950s study on saturated fats, right? The world was deceived for 50-ish years because of one research article that was put out suggesting that saturated fats cause coronary artery disease, and it's basically false, right? So and so there's always going to be bad research, and there's always going to be there's I will say there's always going to be deception there. But one of the other things I'll highlight here is the more we can ask questions and the more we can have conversations around it, the more opportunity there is to weed through some of the BS that gets put out there and some of the poor research that gets published. One of the things that, as I'm having this conversation, actually, that I didn't mention in the presentation, but it's come to mind, is how many studies that are actually very good research studies, but don't meet the level of significance. And we can talk about statistical significance a little bit, but it's very, very, very challenging to publish studies that don't have statistical significance. Journals just don't want to publish it unless there's something like earth changing that came out of it, right? And which is unfortunate because there's a ton of research out there that's sitting in somebody's filing cabinet that for one reason or another didn't reach statistical significance that would actually shed light to all of us on a potential modality that could or could not be useful. And we
Yep.
could iterate on that, but we don't know because the studies won't get published. So,
It just
but
leads to wasted time, right? And people exploring the same things
yeah,
and not being able to move, the whole process forward more. I think
that's right.
to your point, you know, lifestyle modification by headline is a real problem now.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's something that everyone is inundated with. I mean, you can pick any topic, right? I mean, coffee's a great one, right? I mean, you can see an article one morning that says it, will cure cancer and take 20 years off your life. The next morning, if you drink more than 6 cups, you're going to die 15 years earlier, right?
Yeah,
And what people who don't have any ability to look to the study, go to it, and then understand kind of what is being said, it is so hard to be able to make head or tail of any of this, right?
for sure.
Even just understanding the difference between absolute and relative risk and how
Mhm.
pretty much every headline that you see is going to be citing relative risk for the most part.
Yeah,
And that actually translates into when you actually put stick figures in a crowd is usually something you wouldn't think twice about from a risk profile, right?
yeah,
From
100%.
a percentage, like it looks frightening, right? But that it feeds into our 24-hour news cycle kind of clickbait mentality that all of us have, and it's used as a tool, right, to get clicks and to get you to open things and to dive into them. So I think anything that we can do to simplify the process to kind of make it easier for folks is going to be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can't agree more. You hit the nail on the head with that referencing of absolute to relative risk. That's huge. And that, you know, I don't dive into the statistical side a whole lot. We can, but there's that could
That's okay.
probably be an
That's
hour
how you do it.
presentation on its own. But I hope that it like again, there's just some practical nuggets that people can take away from this and and then like I said, I actually have a couple Instagram posts around like basic statistics,
Awesome.
means, standard deviations, z-scores, that type of thing that people could potentially reference if they want a deeper dive after this. So
You have some slides you're going to share?
yeah.
Man, I thought we were just going to talk about the CFP all night. Now,
I've had enough talk about the CMP for 1 year.
all right, fine. We'll let you
Hey,
share.
my one thing on the CFP before we roll is that I really hope that they make the change next year to just do straight like rank-based seating as opposed to the wonky seating they did this year.
That was pretty crazy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 I mean, it worked out, I guess you could say, for both of us, uh, but yeah, it definitely was not the way to go.
No, it's, you learn something every year when you do
That's
something
right.
new, right? So hopefully they learn from it and they
Yeah,
don't repeat the same mistakes.
that's right.
All right,
That's right.
man. The floor is yours.
Cool. Let me jump in here. All right. We all good there? Perfect. Awesome.
Looks great.
So, presentation, it's not rocket science. Hopefully, if you are dealing with rocket science, you've probably come to the wrong place.
Dr. Rocket may be watching this, however, though, so we don't want to insult him if he is paying attention. So hi, Sean.
Definitely.
We love you
Yeah. No,
personally.
actually, what's actually really funny is a good buddy of mine when I was at Alabama, we trained together in the same CrossFit at Element Fitness down there. And he literally was a rocket scientist. And so we would make jokes all the time. We were both getting our PhDs. He was working on some new propulsion system. And I'm like, bro, like exercise science doesn't matter when you are like trying to defy the laws of gravity over here. Okay. So it's always a funny thing for me. All right. So just basic overview here. But the big thing here for me is, like we mentioned, is we want to try and explore some of the strategies for making research more approachable. And we kind of mentioned this in this kind of lead up, right? Is research can be daunting and it can be really, really hard. And I get this, right? With decoding scientific terminology. Like that's the biggest thing, at least in my opinion. That's the biggest thing that we run into is so many of the people who come to our gyms are like, I don't even know where to start, or when people are throwing out this jargon around statistical significance, or like you had mentioned around relative or absolute risk, like those things are just over my head. And so I'm just not even going to pay attention to what the research says, and I'm just going to keep going on my daily life. Or again, as you mentioned, when the clickbait headline comes out and you are thrown that in your face, and you're like, oh gosh, I better stop drinking coffee now because it says it's going to take years off my life. Well, what did that paper actually say? And the best thing we can do is actually have those papers readily available. And one of the issues that we run into, and I'm actually, well, one of the issues that we run into is a lot of the research gets put behind paywalls because uh, publishing articles in journals has become this super lucrative business. Like even on my end, I've tried to publish 4 or 5 papers in the past year, and without Notre Dame's help, like at least 3 of those papers would have cost me $3,000 a pop. So it's become a bit of a wild game in the publishing world to get good scientific based research out there. But I think we can continue to fight the good fight by one, giving good science its due and everybody supporting good science. And then also then also like discrediting bad science. But then the second thing I was going to say with that was utilize these sites that are where you can get free research. ResearchGate is a phenomenal one where individuals post all of their free research. And now social media is just like one of the just almost always available where you can dive into where people are publishing their own research on, Instagram or in LinkedIn or on X. Like all of those have become good platforms. The challenge with social media as a whole is you do have to be able to decipher through the BS. So with that, I kind of have a question actually for the audience as a whole. My slides are going to tick over. There it is. So QR code, or you can use the number down there at slido.com. But I'm curious to know what everyone feels like is their limiting factor to reading and understanding research, whether that be language, like we've already talked about, accessibility. Is it hard to find? Is it the time to find it? Is it money involved, right? Sometimes you have to pay for journals or pay for some of these sites that you have to provide access to. Is it statistics? Like I said, probably enough said there with statistics, but is it statistics? Is it something else? Or is it somewhere, is it the old D, all of the above option? So curious to see what you guys think as far as those. And I can always come back to this. This will stay active, but feel free to dive in. We'll give everybody a couple minutes, maybe not a couple minutes, just a minute or two. But one of the things I will say, kind of back to mine and Tom's conversations while y'all are able to get into this survey here, is um, we the more and more you are able to get into research and the more and more conversations you're able to have, the more benefit everybody's going to have in the community around it, right? And you kind of start to demystify it a little bit, right? So I think that becomes really, really important, really, really beneficial. The more you can just kind of explore research and get your hands dirty a little bit there. I'm semi surprised statistics hasn't taken over as the top one yet, but the more people that probably chime in, the more potential for that. But
We got a nerdy crew here, man.
that's right. That's
They're
right.
on the math train.
That's right. Everybody loves statistics. So, um, but but yeah, so it's really interesting in general as far as like what people feel like are the limiting factors to this. So, but with that said, I'm gonna keep plugging forward, but we can always come back to this if people are still chiming in, and we'll check back in as we go. But so one of the big things for me is really like simplifying the language. Simplifying the language is just a huge piece of the puzzle, right? And I think at both as a researcher, but then also as a practitioner, I think that goes in both directions, right? And so like being able to write papers that, inevitably you have to meet the criteria of the publishing journal. So you have to use a level of, excuse me, professional language, right? But at the same time, you can build some simplifications into different sections of different papers that really provide a lot of help to the everyday person. And one of the big ones is like a practical application section. Not all journals require a practical application section, but I find it really, really valuable if you can add one because it does, again, provide tremendous value to the everyday individual for what is the practical takeaways from this given paper. Also, when you're reading through papers, right? If you get something, you come across something, right? Generally, you're always going to find the abstract first. Usually within that abstract, you can find a purpose statement. Okay, the purpose statement is usually a phenomenal place to start with just understanding like what are the researchers trying to accomplish with this paper. The purpose statement is also a good place to reference back to when you're looking at what they found, and you can ask yourself the question of, is it actually what they set out to find from the get-go? And this is where, again, you kind of can get into the bad research world because some researchers will start with the purpose statement and then based on their findings, they'll change that purpose statement, right? Which in my opinion is probably is not good research. What I try and strive to do and what I would suggest all researchers strive to do is have your purpose statement, utilize your purpose statement. And even if you find something different, that gives you more ammunition and more things to discuss in your discussion section, right? So there's just, it actually adds more value to your paper than it does take away. So don't feel the need to alter your purpose statement just because you may have found something that doesn't perfectly reflect what the purpose of your paper or your research project was. With that said, there's also a lot of really good credible sources out there on social media. So I had mentioned like utilizing Instagram and utilizing X and utilizing LinkedIn. Um, uh, an organization I'm associated with, so I'll be completely honest on that, is Fitomics. I am one of their performance exercise scientists and practitioners on their staff, but our CEO, Dr. Cody Hahn, along with myself, and then another one of our practitioners, Dr. Dan, puts out a letter from the lab. We try to do it weekly. Sometimes it's bi-weekly, but that basically breaks down recent research on a given topic. We've been leaning into a little bit more of the hypertrophy research as of recently, but there's been some good stuff. So that's available for you guys on Instagram. Peter Attia, he does a great job. Andrew Huberman also does a great job. If you're not familiar with Inigo San Milan, he does a great job. His is a little bit more aerobic based research, but really, really good stuff. He's been finding specifically with lactate and its relationship with cancer and cancer cells. Really interesting stuff. Lauren Papanos is a dietitian. I actually worked with her at UCLA, but she owns a company called Functional Fueling that's out of San Diego. She puts out a lot of good, really good, like holistic based research backed information on exactly what her company is called, Functional Fueling. And then Lane Norton. Thing I love about Lane Norton, if you don't follow Lane Norton, is one, he can be a bit crass, so you got to kind of go take his posts with be prepared for what he has to say because he will openly like be dissentful and criticize individuals, which I think we all need to be okay with that in the scientific world. There's too many egos flying around personally. But Lane is also, the thing about Lane is he's a dietitian by trade, and he he goes by the book. He's like, this is exactly what has been published and this is what the research says. And there's things he says that I'm like, I don't know that I agree with that. Like he's talked a lot about the clinical trials on artificial sweeteners, and like I have my own bias. I try and lean away from artificial sweeteners, but the clinical trials that have been done thus far basically say that there's nothing more or less wrong with them, or they're convoluted and have kind of mixed results. But he's going to shoot it to you straight, and that's what I appreciate is like if you're gonna present on the research, like present it non-biased and exactly what the research is saying. And then if you want to say, listen, artificial sweeteners aren't for me, then cool, that's great. If you are gonna say like, okay, well, if the research says artificial sweeteners are fine, then cool, that's your choice. You get to make your own decisions, right? But at least you have the information and it's unbiased and straightforward, and it's exactly what it's is written in the paper. So I find him really, really good for that, like a unbiased, straightforward perspective.
Yeah, I think I'll chime in real quick on the sweeteners topic because I think it's a really good one to highlight something about research in general, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we it can be very easy for us, especially when you're looking at, epidemiologic studies or studies with huge ends where you're looking for signal and statistical significance, as we alluded to think, okay, artificial sweeteners are fine, right? But
right.
it's okay, well, what was the purpose statement of the study that you highlighted, right?
Yeah,
Most of them looking at sweeteners generally are going to be, okay, does it drive insulin resistance? Is there an insulin signal? How does it compare to sugar in regards to body composition or what have you? And in those types of studies, it's gonna, for the most part, look beneficial. There are a few that show that there can be a very low level insulin response, but it's rather, insignificant for the vast majority of people.
right.
But, for people who have, leaky gut or microbiome issues or a lot of other GI issues, especially with sugar alcohols or other ones that can be stimulating and cause issues, that whole sweeteners are fine for that question. It may be a very different question you're asking when you're asking them in regards to yourself, right? So I
Yeah,
think what the point that you raised at the beginning is, what is the purpose of this study? What question are they trying to answer? And then, is what they set out, and is it answering my question, right? Because just because one thing doesn't cause insulin resistance necessarily doesn't also mean that it's completely a good idea for you with your particular health issues. Does that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. No, and you hit the nail on the head, right? Like it can do one thing based on the research, but it could do something completely different when it's like in vivo in your body and in your living state, right? So no, it's spot on. So yeah, which then brings up kind of if we are actually looking at a paper, right? So this is a perfect opportunity, right? When I found this paper. It's actually, I think it's a really well done paper. It can be, and so I was going through this, and it in some aspects of this study actually felt a little bit challenging to understand exactly what they were trying to tell me. But I'll tell you what, the results of it were very, very clear. And so one of the things, and this paper specifically didn't have a clear purpose statement. So I thought it was interesting. So if you were reading through this, right, first thing you come across is the abstract. And again, this is for anybody who wanted to dive into research, right? This is your nuggets right here. So if you just look, this first little red bubble in here, it basically talks about the WHO's physical activity guidelines and CrossFit being a versatile program um, that combines aerobic resistance training with mobility and could help reduce disease incidence among sedentary people. And then it just says long-term studies um, haven't been done in CrossFit, right? And so then they go into what they did, conducted a 9 month intervention, more than 2 CrossFit workouts per week, et cetera, right? So not a clear purpose statement, but you at least know, okay, well, they set out to do a long-term intervention-based study utilizing CrossFit. And then if you jump down to the bottom, you get their results, right? Which basically was the study revealed that potential of CrossFit to enhance physiological and psychological health in beginners and then they talk about for more robust results. So I'm going to get to the results of this paper a little bit further down, but what you get out of literally, like, if you look within those first 2 to 3 sentences of the abstract, you're going to generally get their purpose. And then if you jump down to the bottom and you skip all the uh, scientific lingo and jargon there in between, you're going to get the purpose of it. And then you're going to get the results that they got out of their study. Right. And somebody might be like, your next thought is like, okay, well, what does it mean to say CrossFit can enhance physiological or psychological health in beginners. And like I said, we'll get to that because the next place you would go to figure that out is either their conclusion, which is will be at the end of the paper, or you would go to their practical application section if this was a journal that had a practical application section in it. This study, I'm also going to talk more about, but this study specifically had a purpose statement in their abstract, and it was broken out into like purpose, methods, results, discussion, very clearly. But you can see this one; it's painted very very clearly, right? Purpose of the study was to determine whether physiological and or muscle strength measures could predict performance on three common CrossFit workouts. So those are going to be your two places, right? So you start there, start with that purpose statement, see what they're trying to get at, and then you could kind of evaluate the rest of the paper from there. And then, like I said, if you're reading that whole abstract, purpose and then conclusion, and those are going to be your two places that even I on if I'm just picking up a paper for a quick read, those are the two things I'm hitting. And then depending on what those two things say, will lead me to decide, okay, am I going to now read through their methods, their statistical analyses, et cetera, et cetera. And then, like I said, this was the conclusion from that previous long-term intervention-based study for CrossFit. Super interesting on this one. I don't know if anybody's seen this paper yet. If you guys have, phenomenal. But basically, they saw a significant improvement in VO2 max after 9 months, an 11.5% improvement, which I thought was pretty awesome. And then they also did, I believe it was like a survey based for overall well being, and then some resting metabolic rate testing, and all of those saw significant improvements. Non-significant positive trends in body weight, fat mass, and muscle mass was registered. So that's again where you get into this statistical significance game. And I didn't dive, I'll be, again, honest here. Like I didn't dive into what their non-significant positive trend on those body composition metrics were, mostly because I specifically wanted to highlight that you can get the bulk of the information that you need from a practical application standpoint from like I'll say 3 to 6 sentences, right? So you get purpose, you get conclusion. Cool. I know that I can improve my VO2 max by 11% if I do more than 2 CrossFit workouts per week for 9 months. Now, that is an adult beginners, so if you're not a beginner, and again, you'd have to go look and see what their criteria was for a beginner, but I would basically be blasting that out to anybody who was walking into my gym and saying, "Hey, I'm interested in starting CrossFit for the first time." Great. You can improve your VO2 max by 11.5% if you come to 2 workouts per week for the next 9 months. Done. Now, that same person's probably going to be like, what does that mean for me? And then you can dive into the benefits of VO2 max and longevity. Like I anticipate everybody on this call probably knows that VO2 max is basically the number one predictor of longevity and health span across for everybody, right? And very, very small. You for every like 1% of VO2 max is an extra like 2 years onto your life. Obviously, that there's a J curve there and it rolls off. But yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the practical application section? Because I don't know that I've ever actually seen that in a paper. So you're saying that you would have that like as a separate section within the paper, and if so, where does that typically live?
Yeah, so it actually typically lives right after the conclusion section. There's two journals that I know of that require it. JSCR, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, requires it. And then there's another one. It might be medicine and science and sport and exercise. I forget. But I know there's another journal that we actually just submitted one of our other papers to not very long ago, um, that also required a practical application section, but it typically does reside right after your conclusion section at the end of the paper. And typically, they want you to basically take your findings and provide kind of as it suggests, like a practically applied excerpt. So how would you apply what you found in real time? And so with because JSCR leans into obviously strength conditioning research, right? A lot of times you'll see, okay, we found, an 11% increase in a counter movement jump height based on this exercise program. And so then in your practical application section, you would say, this was the exercise program. And based on the results, it's recommended that you execute it like this in order to improve your counter movement jump height over this period of time.
Yep.
So a lot of times some good researchers will put some of that information. I should walk that statement back. Some good writers, research writers, will put excerpts like that into their discussion section and or their conclusions. But I like I said, I just advocate for more people to include it as its own standalone section because it allows people who are less familiar with scientific writing to be able to go and find the action items in their own section of a paper. Um, and I think the more we put it in, whether or not it's asked for in a journal, let a journal tell you, you know, no, we don't want it because more and more journals are going to open format. And so yeah, so I would just advocate for more people to put it in and let a journal come back and say, no, thanks. So my next big strategy, right, is leveraging visuals, right? I think visual aids is just, it's tremendous and helps so much with us being able to understand research. And we know this, right? People have different ways of learning different kinds of information. And so being able to see data displayed on a good visual aid provides a lot more information to somebody than being able to just see it written out. And what I should have done here, and now again, like as you're going through presentations, you're like, man, I should have done this. I should have overlaid the results section right up right next to these two visual aids and been like, hey, you tell me which one makes more sense. But for the sake of this, right? This was a paper. This was that. It's a paper by I think his last name is Butcher et al. But and I have the citation I think on the next slide. But this was the paper that in that purpose statement they were trying to see if there were specific markers that could predict WOD times essentially, right? And so what they did was look at the CrossFit total, right? So this is your strength-based numbers, right? I'm blanking on what the total is now. It's overhead press, clean, and deadlift, maybe, or overhead press, clean, and squat. It's something along those lines. But pure strength numbers, right? Can pure strength numbers predict Fran time? And then the next one was, does the CrossFit total predict your grace time? Well, you can look and see very clearly here, even just off the visual. We're not even talking about the statistics here that they do present, but not even talking about the statistics. It, I think it's obvious, and Tom, Jen, somebody tell me if I'm wrong, but that obviously, I mean, they were both significant, but the CrossFit total does a better job of predicting your grace time versus your Fran time, right? So, and if you just look at this, like the slope of the lines, right? How steep that line is, you can tell faster Fran times were associated with higher CrossFit total, or excuse me, faster grace, oops, wrong direction. Faster grace times were associated with higher CrossFit totals. And Grace being um 30 snatches, right? Yeah. 30 snatches for time. Or is it clean and jerks?
Jerks. Yeah.
Clean and jerks, yeah. So 30 clean and jerks for time, right? Um, so it's evident there, right? That if the stronger you are, the faster you're going to be able to move on your grace, right? So, and then if you look at so R is a correlation metric, right? So how are two variables correlated or associated with one another? And so a 0.88 R means that it's a negative, a strong negative correlation. So essentially, the higher your total is, the faster your time is, or the less time it takes. That's the negative correlation. So it would be in two opposite directions there. And then, like I mentioned on the Fran one, it's the same, similar, also statistically significant, but it's a 0.65, so a little bit smaller. I would still consider that. I think by the guides of um by the guides of like the research standard is it would be considered a moderate correlation, moderately strong negative correlation. But I would still say that's a pretty good indicator that if I was stronger, I'd probably be able to move a little bit faster on my Fran time. So I thought that was really interesting. But the visuals to me is what takes this, right? If I'm reading through the paper, like I probably don't even need to read through the paper. I can just look at this and be like, okay, the weaker I am, or the less my CrossFit total, the higher my grace time, and the same thing with Fran.
Yeah, it's such a pet peeve of mine. I feel if the authors would just spend a little bit more time thinking about how they could make their graphs and figures more accessible
Yeah,
and understandable, because ideally you really should be able to look at it relatively quickly and understand what's going on, right?
yeah,
And that should really be obvious. And there's a lot of times where I can spend a fair amount of time looking at figures and graphs, before I can come to a conclusion about what I'm actually looking at.
yeah, yeah. No doubt, no doubt. And that's how I feel. And it's actually funny because this next one, right? This one took me a little bit longer to decipher. And this is from the long intervention based study, right? Where they saw the 11% increase in VO2 max across 9 months. So I was like looking at this and I was like, all right, I'm trying to figure out what they're presenting here. And I purposefully like tried to limit the amount of information on this picture so that other people could try and digest the same amount of information, right? And it took me a little bit. I won't, and I still think the paper is a really good paper, and it has really good information. But again, same thing. It kind of took me a little bit, but then I finally figured out, okay, they broke based on their results, right, across the total. So you see the total on this right hand side where it says n equals 16. That's their total. And that's their 11% increase from time point zero, which is we'll call it the solid gray bar, to time point four, which is the dark gray or black bar on the far right. So that's their 11% increase that they reported on in their conclusion. Well, then they decided to break this up because they had what they classified as non-responders, like moderate responders, and then what I would say are hyper responders, which actually I think is pretty interesting because then when you look at the hyper responders, which is it's only five individuals out of their 16, but that's a third of their population. Those individuals increase their VO2 max by 23 to 62%. So like that's pretty so calling that a hyper responder I think is actually pretty valid because I would say that's not typical. But it is really interesting. So ultimately, when I looked at this, I was challenged at first to be like, okay, what are they trying to get at? But the more I dove into it and the more I kind of like tried to decipher it a bit, the more I was like, okay, it is interesting the way they ended up presenting it.
Yeah, no, this is really cool because what it also highlights is that the non-responders were the fittest, right? Because they
Yeah.
had the highest VO2s to start.
Yep. Yep.
So our folks who are going to get the biggest bang for your buck are your least conditioned folks.
Yep.
And if you've looked at that VO2 mortality curve, it's going from the lowest to
Yeah.
the second lowest that gets you the biggest bang for your buck, right? So
Yep.
this is exactly what you want to see. This is everybody that needs to get into an affiliate. That's all the people who don't do anything. Right?
Yep.
They're going to get the biggest benefit, which is it's awesome. That's what you want.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And you know what? Thanks for highlighting that. I actually, funny thing is, I actually missed that this first go around. The first go around was that the non-responders were your fittest individuals. So, but um, but yeah, it's super interesting. And again, like I'm at first I was like, gosh, why would you present it this way? You're actually like taking away from it. But then once you actually like dive in, you're like, oh, okay, actually, it's actually really interesting and it provides more information. My one thought is like maybe you break this up into two different graphs or you show it a little bit differently so it's a little bit more approachable. But again, like I'm not the one who did the research, and I'm sure people can criticize all of my papers to the end of time. But you know, it's still really, really I find it really, really interesting.
Well, the other cool thing that you could do with this too, right, for the non-responders,
Yeah.
you could say, if you're fit, you shouldn't do CrossFit because it makes your VO2 worse.
Mhm.
You just looked at the study and looked at the research, right? But that's
Yeah.
also because it doesn't show you that they may have increased skeletal muscle by 7 or 8% and decreased their fasting insulin, right? Which
Yeah.
probably has a significantly higher impact on their overall health span and lifespan than going from 51 to 49 on your VO2, which is
Right.
more or less negligible, right? This is the other reason too, and I was going to say this because you could look at that from a conclusion standpoint, and an author could write that, right? And if an author
Yeah.
comes to the table with an agenda, they can take this data and they can manipulate it in whatever way they say fit, right? So looking at these graphs and understanding them is super important. And I'll tell you the first thing that I do when I look at a study, especially a nutritional one, is I look at the methods, right? So I
Yeah.
look at the
Oh yeah.
purpose, and then invariably at a nutrition study, you look at it and it's like, we asked 5,000 people to fill out a food survey once a month on everything they ate on Tuesday at 2 p.m. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to read this anymore. You can move on,
That's right.
right? This
That's right.
nutritional recall bullshit is a waste of your time. You can't drive conclusions from that. You don't need to spend the next 45 minutes looking at this study, right? And so just having quick ways to look at things like that and see, no, this conclusion doesn't make sense on how they did this. Like you should be able to look at the methods and be like, okay, does this make sense to answer that purpose,
That's
right?
right.
You know,
Yep.
and if it doesn't, move on.
Move on. Yeah. And it's a you know it's a great highlight. I will openly say like I don't really discuss the methods, looking at the methods too much here in this presentation. But I think it is worthwhile should individuals look at the the purpose statement and the conclusions and then go like, okay, I need to know more, right? And then go to the methods and be like, okay, does this match up with what they are trying to show?
No, I totally agree. And it's not understanding, okay, well, this is the gas analyzer that they use. Like, there's a lot of information there, but
Yep.
it's like,
Yep.
okay, what groups of people did they pick? How
Yep.
did they split them up? Is this group of people applicable to me? And does it make sense what they did?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Because a lot of times you look at it and it's like, well, this doesn't, like, this is not intuitively, it's not how you would set it up to answer that purpose question, right?
That's right.
And
That's
nor
right.
could you drive that conclusion from it. So.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yep. And that's, and again, to your credit, there is like one of the first things I will go to after those first two strategy pieces is the population is like, and the population is usually, and I'm going to actually click back is like, usually the population's pretty easy to find because they give it to you like right here is 16 beginners, 14 males, age range, height in centimeters, weight in kilograms. Like that's the next information. That's literally the very next information that they give you. So that's my next thing is like, okay, let me understand who they're actually working with. But after you dive into the visual after visuals, right? We come around to how do you engage your community, right? And I think like one of the things I will highlight, and it's the very last bullet point, right, is that CFMS and Grand Rounds is really like set the standard for engaging the community with research backed and credible individuals. And so the biggest thing I would just say is to anybody who's in their own gym and is like, okay, well, I see these papers or I'm getting this information and like I'm super excited about it. Well, what how do I actually get my members to be excited about it? And I think the biggest thing for me and the biggest thing that I think about is like we got to talk about it. There's so many times where people just shy away from talking about it because they don't like they don't want to be the guy who's like, ah, well, the research says this. Well, it's like, well, no, let's take those opportunities. If there's an interesting, if you come across an interesting paper, you see something on one of the social medias, like bring that into your gym. And if you're the gym owner, then it's like post those results up and be like, hey, I want to, I'm going to put out like a QR code poll around people who are interested in talking about it or like what are your guys' thoughts and let people respond to you in regards to that research paper or just try and get more engagement around it because ultimately the only way research is going to get out to more people is if we bring it to them because I think we kind of know this is like less people don't generally seek out research, right? Is like it's either going to be on social media, it's going to be in their face, or it's going to be the clickbait title that came out on the Today Show or whatever your local media feed is, and people are going to come into your gym and be like, oh, well, I heard on the news that again, drinking 6 cups of coffee is actually going to take time off my life. And you're like, well, actually, I read that paper and that's not exactly true because this is why, right? And then you could have that paper posted up at your front desk and be like, community engagement opportunity here is we're going to sit down on Friday night and talk about this, or if that's too nerdy, then like I said, a simple QR code because we have the technology now to do it and like a basic Google survey or Google form that allows people to present their interests and their questions, and then you can respond to those as they come. I think is a phenomenal way to just try and get more information to your community and have it be credible and you get to control that message a little bit more rather than them getting peppered with these clickbait articles that we all know are can be just so poisonous.
I stumbled across an affiliate's website the other day, and they had a number of statements around improving VO2, how CrossFit can do that, and body composition and health span. And they had embedded links in those statements on their website that went to the research papers, which I
Oh
thought
wow.
was really cool, like straight to the research. I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I think again, like we utilize social media like so much. Like let's try and actually utilize it for the good that it can be, right? Like I will say for the longest time I'm like, like I'm over this social media game, but I've found that if you actually shape like your feed and your information the right way, it can truly be good information. And you can actually get a lot more use out of it than just the normal nonsense that gets pushed through feeds. Oops. Uh, with that said, I also would say like emphasize collaborative nature of research, right? I think one of the things that so many people, when they hear research, they think of the guy in the lab with the pipette and the lab coat on and his goggles, and that's not for me. But in reality, like there's research is multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary. It takes everybody that's on this call to everybody that's in the gym in order to get and beyond to be able to get research done. It's a collaborative effort from start to finish. And one of the things like I wanted to mention is we are currently working on a research project that is literally involving like myself as a PhD, Tom as an MD. We have some statisticians involved, Jen as with her dietitian background, like everyone, all walks of life, working on putting together a research project that, will show how beneficial CrossFit is for specific populations, whether that be obesity or metabolic syndrome, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And at the end of the day, emphasizing that collaborative nature, I think it brings more people in. And the other thing I want to highlight as a part of that is research can't be done without the participants that want to be involved, right? And so we have to have people that are willing to donate their time in a lot of instances. Sometimes there's some money involved, and we can pay participants, but a lot of times we're asking people to donate their time in order to be a part of research studies. And at the end of the day, what you get out of it is you'll probably get some free lab testing, free body composition, free VO2 max, and then you get the information that's associated with that, that if you weren't a part of the research study, you would then ultimately have to pay for that kind of information, or pay for those kinds of tests. So highlighting this fact and highlighting to any of your gym owners or and goers that if there is an opportunity to be involved in research, as long as it doesn't, completely negatively affect you and your ability to put food on the table, right? I would just advocate that you find a way to be involved. Like I said, if it's as a participant or it's being a collaborator or loaning your gym space out, or things along those lines, like really, really beneficial, and it goes a long way. That I can't say how appreciative it is, like for when it's me on the opposite end as the researcher. The last thing I would say here is, the best thing we can do is just foster an informed culture. The more often we can talk about research and provide research to everybody in our community, and then like repost when you see interesting research, repost about it. Even if it's a question of like, even if it's reposting the research and saying like, what does everybody think about this, and just seeing some of the feedback that you get. But the more you can foster that informed community, and you're talking about research in the gym, and you're telling your gym members and the people around you, like, go out, be a critical thinker, ask questions. I think that is the best possible thing that any of us and all of us can be doing, as well as providing, like, don't just be also to be the person that's like, oh, I read this in a research study. I'll be like, okay, well, here's the research study. Or if you don't remember what it was, be like, let me go look it up and I'll bring it back to you. Like the more we can foster that informed culture and talk about research, the better off we're going to be. And the better off our gym members are, the better off everybody across all of our populations are going to be. And then one of the things I want to highlight here is we should see research as an ongoing and evolving process that everyone can contribute to, and that is ever changing. It's like, don't be dogmatic about anything, right? Because at the end of the day, back to like things that we learned probably like 20 years ago have now changed, and we now know completely different information about them. And, whether that is, again, like the poor research around saturated fatty acids or sugar or high fructose corn syrup, or like these things are constantly evolving, right? That was more of on the poor research side. But nowadays, like there's opportunities now where we believed one thing at one point, and I'm fuzzy about this in my brain, but right there was a one point where we believed that cancer cells just grew and they didn't really need fuel, right? And then we figured out, well, actually, cancer cells primarily consume sugars as fuel. And that's where, like, potentially a ketogenic diet could be a intervention in certain cancer and for certain cancers. And so there's just constantly this ever evolving process that is evolved, that is involved in research. And I just strongly encourage to not ever take any research, one, for face value, but then two, as being dogmatic and saying like this is the way and this is the only way that it could be, because there's just so much that we don't know. And it's the only way that we're going to figure it out is through research. Last thing to kind of wrap this all up, right, is that I just hope that you guys can take some nuggets out of this, find some strategies, simplify the language, use some of the visuals, right? Like if you take a purpose, or if you take a conclusion and some of the graphs and you post those on a one sheeter in your CrossFit gym or on social media, like that's more than enough for people to take information from it, right? So I just would encourage anyone to do that and to start applying these strategies at home and in your community, because again, like that's us fostering that informed culture is the best way we're going to be able to, one, get people more comfortable with research, but then also be able to inform everybody and have people more informed to be able to drive some of these interventions and drive a healthier society and improve all of these qualities that everybody, I'm sure, on this call is really, really excited about. But we've got to be able to do it from an informed and an intelligent manner. And then the last piece of this is follow some of those previous mentioned individuals for some additional research nuggets. And there was something else I was going to mention in there. I'm blanking on it right now, but follow. Oh, if you can be involved in research, be involved. Like whether that's as a participant or, like I said, if you have the opportunity to loan out some gym space, like hugely appreciated. And if you come across that or you're in a college town, like I guarantee you, there's individuals out there looking to do exercise science research in a gym space. So please advocate and be there to help out and um, be a willing participant.
Yeah. Well said, man. No, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Jen, anything pop up in the queues?
Great. Can you guys hear me? I'm kind of muted, but
Kind of,
Yeah,
sort of.
sort of.
Yeah, it was funny. Do you follow Grant Tinsley at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him post yesterday or the day before, and he's like, I can't believe it, but I still need two more subjects for my body comp analysis. So he's like, you get full DEXA studies, like all this body comp, da, 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 da. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
can't believe I still don't have two, but I need two, so just like a perfect case in point.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, no, that was great, man. And I will too, another source. I mean, we put out a study a week. And for ones to post in affiliates, they're ones that I think that our community would find interesting. A lot of them are focused on, nutrition and fueling and performance and recovery and different forms of injury and, optimizing health span. And so if you want to just start there, you can take those studies and throw that up in the affiliate and have a conversation. You can start a local journal club is a great way to do that.
Yep.
Uh, to find a couple of interested, souls from the affiliate and talk about it. I think demystifying research, right, and taking it out of this magical palace of academia and bringing it, to this is what you're trying to do, right, and bring it down to the people who can actually make it actionable and impact their lives. Because it's very easy for the vast majority of that information to stay in that ivory tower and not help the people that it's supposed to be helping, right? So
Right.
I really appreciate everything that you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's great. I'm really excited to share this recording and pull out some highlights just to spark some interest to our folks that kind of watch it on demand. And I think too, right, it just highlights the fact that we're in the age of abundant information, but interpretation is still kind of the thing that can be the make or break in terms of the way that we can change like health outcomes and the way we take care of our community and our people and support it. And so it just can potentially be another tool that the affiliate owner and the coach can use to support the healthcare journey of their folks, just from understanding and awareness and essentially like, for what it's worth, is scientific current events, right? It was really kind of what we
Yeah.
can with, right? Because new stuff is coming out all the time. And to just feel like you can have somewhat of a pulse on trends and what people are saying and the way that it's changing and evolving and all of this. And it's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. I really like the journal club, local journal club's idea. And then, like you said, Jen, like under like the interpretation of it is just huge. And the way, and again, the more opportunity and the more eyes we can get on it, you actually get different people's interpretation of it, right? And then you get to have a really, really nice, neat conversation about, oh, well, I noticed this, or I noticed that, or I like, what is this, or what is that? And it again, it just fosters these different ideas and questions. And I think one of the things I had like mentioned in there, and I hope that everybody feels this way, but I know that more academics need to feel this way, is that like nobody should be above questioning. Like question, 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 and don't feel like because somebody has a PhD or whatever behind their name, like that you can't be like, oh, well, did you think of this? And maybe they didn't, right? Like I will 100% say like there's, especially when I was in my dissertation, I was like so far down the rabbit hole that I needed somebody like my wife does this to me all the time, right? Is like pulls you back out and is like, oh, did you actually think of, this? And I was like, oh, that's actually a really good idea. I didn't think of that, but it's because you're just like, you're so deep in it that you miss like these things that are like basic ideas that the like general population would be like, well, what about, you know, whatever it is, whatever it is, whatever the topic might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's very well said, man. I think that, what I've learned over the years with all of this is to stay very humble.
Mhm.
Because in all likelihood, the story's going to change.
Yeah.
Uh, and to be willing to change your mind when the evidence pushes you in that direction, right? And I think, especially around nutritional stuff, right, it becomes dogma, it becomes
Yeah.
religious, it becomes part of your identity for so many of us, right? Keep an open mind. It's okay to change your mind. Be open to learning. Um, if anything, you should welcome challenges to your worldview because you're either going to have a better understanding of why you are correct, or you're going to learn something and then be more informed and change your mind and find the true path, right? And either way, it's a win-win. The only way you don't win is if you don't stay open to new information and new ideas. So,
100%. 100%.
well, really appreciate the time, man. I'm sorry I dragged us on. I could shoot the stuff with you for forever. So thank
No
you so
doubt.
much for spending the time with us this evening and all of your work supporting us with, trying to get some objective research out for CrossFit as a methodology to combat chronic disease. Really hoping that we can push that forward this year.
Yeah.
Uh,
Me
so
too.
thanks to everybody for hanging in there, and we will see you again soon.